Hello, welcome back to everyone that's tuning into our channel, American Ultra Stock. Here we are, Braden and I, analyzing Camp Cupcake. It's here. A lot of people have been very complimentary to how Greg's selection has been lately. This is not, to people that are casuals, this is not his fault, really, we have to say. I think it might be his favorite roster because he gets to call with his MLS buddies. But here it is, Braden, straight to the point. When you see that roster, do you think it's more of a negative or a positive all together, all things together?
It's a difficult one because I think there's evidence you could use for both sides. On the one hand, I think this is one of the better Camp Cupcake rosters that we've seen, just in terms of the Olympics is coming up later this year, and over half the players actually do have that Olympic eligibility, which is good. I would have liked to see more because honestly, like some of these players, it's nice that they earned it through their MLS performances or whatever, and it's a good moment for them. But realistically, some of these players have no shot at ever being able to represent the USMNT at a major tournament at an A team level, maybe even at a B team level. Some of them might not even be good enough for the Gold Cup, so it's kind of just wasted spots. But honestly, over half the players are Olympic eligible, and that's honestly more than I thought there would. I thought there would be more MLS lifers, like the guy you see in my background, Jesus Ferreira, wasn't included. Walker Zimmerman wasn't included. Players like that I definitely thought would be here. No, Areola, legit, some of the old favorites from Berhalter. So that's definitely a positive to take from this.
Yeah, I would say it's more of a positive. Honestly, I couldn't have imagined a better Camp Cupcake roster, really, especially if we take into consideration that a lot of these players right now are, well, it's mid-competition, mid-season. It's tough for the guys in Europe to come here, even though we're on a break. I really thought it was going to be an MLS lifer roster, so I'm really surprised. To me, I think it's a huge positive, especially on the points that you touched on. It's a very young roster, and even though some of these guys are, I don't think they should ever get a call back again. But it's nice to see a lot of the young guys that I think may be a crucial part of the Olympic cycle to get a look in for the main team. I'm really happy with some of these inclusions. And as we talk about the inclusions, we mentioned a lot of players that this might be their only camp. Any surprises? What are the biggest surprises that you think are in this roster?
Yeah, some of the biggest surprises for me are some of the older players who we haven't really seen on the radar at all, like Sean Zawadzki. He hasn't even been doing that good in MLS, and he's not Olympic eligible. I don't really understand this inclusion at all, especially when there's several midfielders in MLS that are Olympic eligible, like Daniel Edelman, Cole Bassett, Benjamin Kramaski, Brian Gutierrez, Obed Vargas, just to name a couple that I think would have been much better uses of a spot than Zawadzki. He is very versatile, which is good for tournament competitions, but he's not going to be at any tournaments for us, so it doesn't really make sense, especially in a one-off game type of camp. I don't know why he's here. Timothy Tillman as well is an interesting one. He officially made his one-time switch to represent the U.S., presumably for the Gold Cup back last summer, and then didn't get called up for the Gold Cup, which I'm sure must have hurt for him, but he does finally have his first opportunity to represent the U.S., but again, I don't think it's really warranted. I think, like Zawadzki, who plays for the Crew, who won MLS Cup, I think it's more of a team-based merit instead of a player-based merit. He hasn't really been as good as I would hoped for LAFC so far since moving back to MLS. Another one, Brian White, I actually do think does deserve to be here. He's almost 28, 29, but he did have one of the best seasons for a striker in MLS, so I think it's fair to give him this chance because he's never going to get it again. And honestly, the Olympic eligible strikers that we have, they're all either in Europe or just really bad. Like Darren Yappi would probably be the only other one domestically, and he's not even playing for the worst team in the league. So to have Brian White here to complement Duncan McGuire, as long as McGuire starts, I think it is fair. But those are some of the surprises.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's completely fair to have White there. Honestly, as you said, Yappi, he shouldn't even be considered for the B team of the Olympic cycle, really. He would just be there based on age. I've never seen him produce anything. The biggest surprise to me is Brian Gutierrez not being included, and that's already an introduction to our next topic, the disappointments. That's my biggest disappointment. I feel like he's being neglected quite a lot, and we know that he's a dual national technically, so there is a chance that we might lose him. I don't see why we didn't include him here. I seriously can't. This is the biggest surprise. I don't know if there's something. We never know the full picture behind the scenes. There may be fatigue, something with looking for a move. We never know, really. We haven't seen anything rumored, and I would imagine that we would see if there was anything around there, any clubs lurking around for him. But that's my biggest disappointment. What's yours, Braden?
I definitely agree with the Gutierrez take. I think another interesting thing is that the Chicago Fire had two players who realistically should have been in this roster, and neither of them are there. And I don't know if that's on the coaching staff or whoever selected the roster, but Chris Brady and Brian Gutierrez both should be in this roster. They're both extremely important parts of our Olympic team. Brady could potentially be our starting goalkeeper there. Gutierrez is one of our best playmakers. And if this is the case that Chicago Fire declined to release them, I'm going to be absolutely furious with them because there's absolutely no need. MLS preseason doesn't start until after the camp is done. So there's really no point having not releasing them. But we have seen the Fire do this in the past, in particular for the U20 World Cup. And if they did it again, they're just completely a joke of a club because this is where MLS players are supposed to shine on a US stage. This is literally used to promote MLS. This is what this camp is for. And to not let some of the most key, exciting youngsters in MLS play there is just embarrassing from a club's perspective. Jalen Neal as well was another surprise exclusion for a lot of people. I still think he's recovering from his injury. He hasn't played a competitive game since he got the injury almost 6 months ago. So I think it's fair to not have him here. It's just a little disappointing that he didn't recover a little bit sooner because there are 0 Olympic eligible center backs on this roster, which is kind of crazy to me, especially since we have options like George Campbell from Montreal, who's not that good, but at least he could be at the Olympics. Brandon Craig, obviously, who hasn't been able to play for club, but is still, I think, one of the most talented center backs in our very limited Olympic pool. Matai Akamboni, honestly, would have been more deserving of a chance here than players like Ian Murphy or Jackson Ragen or James Sands, who are MLS players who have had good team success, but really aren't anything special. And Akamboni is, I think, a very key player for the future, but if he didn't even get called up to the U17 World Cup, he's not going to get a call up here, realistically. And then it just kind of sucks that some of our center backs for the Olympic age, like Tompkinson and Dietz, are playing abroad and couldn't have been called up. But I think Josh Winder could have, since he's in the academy. I don't know why he's not here as well. So the center back pool definitely had a bit of surprises. And one more surprise that I see here is players like Jesus Ferreira, Brandon Vasquez, Georgi Mihailovic, and Zach Steffen not being here. Mihailovic and Steffen in particular just made their moves back to MLS, so I think this would have been a perfect camp to reintroduce them, especially since Mihailovic in particular, and actually Steffen as well, have been on the cusps of the A team at one point. Even Steffen was our number one keeper at one point before Turner really emerged a year or two ago. So I'm surprised that they're not here. Ferreira and Vasquez seem to be the favorites, especially for Camp Cupcake. So I'm surprised they're not here, especially since both of them are younger than Brian White. So I don't know. I think both of them could be potentially used for an Olympic overage call-up. Ferreira only missed out by a week for being eligible. So those are my surprise exclusions.
Yeah, I would actually have maybe of a hot take, but I don't think that Ferrer or Vasquez had a good season in MLS. And I think that if Greg's basing this on performance and not name and reputation, it's completely fair to leave him out, honestly. And this is not a dig at Vasquez for taking the move to Monterrey, which a lot of people are so disappointed by. It truly is, in my opinion, he didn't have a good season. I know that Cincy had a good season, but I don't think he personally did. And I think that Ferrer was very underwhelming. I think that almost every single goal that Ferrer scored wouldn't translate in a better league. So I think it's perfectly fine. I would say that White had a better season than them. And I think that this may be playing devil's advocate here, but I think one of the reasons on why Greg didn't call up younger players like Akamboni or Winder, he's likely thinking that since it is a very young roster, he wants the backbone of this team to be a little bit more experienced. I can kind of see what he would go there. I see an argument for it, but it is, I think we're so thin at the back. Even that the fact that we're mentioning 16-year-olds, and I agree, and I think that they should be included here if I was doing the roster. It's insane, really. And as a lot of this, honestly, I'm going to say there's another hot take. A lot of people rate him, but I'll say we don't have a single good center back in this pool, really. For the opposition that we're going to face, it's fine. We're going to get by. But I don't think that Miles Robinson is him at all. And I'm a big Sens fan, but he had a terrible season too. So yeah, now moving on to the next one. We mentioned our analysis of the roster, the biggest stakes. We're not going to be expanding too much on this. Also, we'll leave up all on the comments for you guys the full roster so you can check. I'm pretty sure everyone must have seen it already. But what to expect? What should we expect? We know it's not the highest level opposition. It is Camp Cupcake, really. I like the concept of trying to put some players there and give them a go with the national team jersey. But what do you think we should expect? What are you expecting, Braden?
I think anything other than an easy win, despite the very lackluster group that we have, it would be a disappointment considering that we're playing Slovenia, who are not traditionally one of the best soccer nations by any means. They do have a couple good players, but all of their best players play in Europe, abroad, and won't be in this camp. It's all going to be domestically based players in theory. It may be a couple that play outside, but it's not even going to be their A team. And honestly, I think this roster could even compete a little bit with their A team. I think because of the center backs, we'd probably get torched by players like Benjamin Sesko. But considering it's going to be mainly a B team for Slovenia, this should be a very comprehensive win. Hopefully, some of our players like McGuire can score. And I think this camp will be a success if our young players actually start. As long as the older players are only reserved for the backline, like you said, to give a more experienced backbone of the team. Although the fact that Walker Zimmerman and Aaron Long aren't here is a little interesting considering that they are more experienced players who have been with the team in the past. And honestly, I think they're both better than players like Ian Murphy and Jackson Ragen. But I think as long as the young players, especially going forward, players like Diego Luna, Duncan McGuire, Bernard Kamungo, Esmir Bajraktarevic, Jack McGlynn, as long as these players are giving chances, both the left backs as well are Olympic eligible, which is nice to see. As long as they get good chances to prove themselves and they can perform relatively well, despite the lower competition, I think overall that would be a success.
Completely agree. I think it's really exciting just hearing some of those names. I'm really happy for. I'm not gonna say his last name, Bajraktarevic, the Esmir. I'm just gonna call him Esmir. Jack McGlynn. Really happy for him. I think that Luna, everyone's expecting for him to start. I think he made a name for himself to the point where I think he really will start. I'm just gonna mention that I don't think that Cade Cowell is gonna be a good player like most people will say, but I expect him to start. Regardless, really, really nice. What I'm expecting, to answer my own question, is for the young players to get a goal, like you said, as long as they get some experience and perform well too. I'm expecting them to perform well and at least try. I'd rather see them try and fail in some plays rather than just passing sideways and playing passive. Just give it a go, be aggressive, and have the young players out. I'm completely fine, and I think that's a success, honestly. Take it as it is. It's Camp Cupcake at the end of the day. Now, what would you have liked to see different? We mentioned some of the players that I would like to call. I'm just going to say, you already said his name. I don't see why Zimmerman's not included here, especially with the argument of the experience, which I think is what Greg was going for here. We've seen his influence in the backstage, behind the scenes. I feel like he could be a really good mentor to some of these young players. Now, what do you think what would be the biggest change that you would have done, Braden?
Honestly, I agree with that. The fact that we don't have any good Olympic eligible center backs that could have gotten realistic call-ups, that wouldn't have been a lot of a stretch, because if this is really based on MLS performance, players like Brandon Craig, despite him being one of our best center back prospects, he didn't play at all in MLS this season, so it's kind of unfair to call him up if that's based on the merit. And we've seen how crucial Zimmerman can be in the locker room. He's a locker room favorite for the A team, even though he seems to have been moved on from, especially since he's not even in this Camp Cupcake. But I think he would have been nice to have there for experience, because a lot of the over 23 guys are mid-age, 26, but there's no real experience in this team unless you count like Brian White, who's 28, but he doesn't have any USMNT experience before and probably never will again. So I don't think that really counts in terms of leadership. Probably Miles Robinson would be the main one, but he just ruined his career basically by staying in MLS. So not very much of an encouraging leader, I would say. But yeah, I think there's a lot of young players that could have been included that I'm disappointed that weren't. I think it's nice to know that Greg mentioned Griffin Yao and Ruckus Pukstas were supposed to be here, but their clubs in Europe did decline. So it's nice that he was actually looking out to give these players chances. I am wondering if maybe there's a U20 camp that could be happening at the same time, because that would explain the lack of some of the players like Benjamin Kramaski, for example, who was actually with the USMNT A team earlier in 2023, not too long ago, has been a key part of the Olympic roster. So to not see him here, unless he's going to be with the U20s, that makes sense. But the fact that he's not here is actually kind of mind blowing to me, especially considering some of the other midfielders that are there and the wingers as well. A lot of the wingers are not in MLS, so I understand like if players like Augustine Anello, Zach Booth, Grede Osandina are needed by their clubs, but Anello has basically been kicked out of the first team, and he's been with the Olympic team in the past. I think he would have been a little bit more useful here than someone like Cade Cowell. I also think a lot of the wingers that we brought can easily play in the cam. So if we get to taken out like Aziel Jackson, who didn't really have too good of a season, he is Olympic eligible, which is positive, but he's not that great of a player. Timothy Tillman, like I mentioned, we could have shifted Esmir or Diego Luna to the cam and called up some more wingers that are eligible. I think the main one would be Christian Fletcher. I think that would have been more of a positive.
Yeah, I think that you went too far right there, Brett. I don't expect Greg to know Christian Fletcher. No, I'm just kidding. I don't expect him to know too much about him. But all things considered, from my expectations, I think it's a good roster. We come to the end of this analysis. As we said, guys, we did extend it a bit. We try to give justice to these guys. Most of them won't be part of the cycle for any cycle per se in the future. We hope that the youngsters can impress us. We'll leave again in the comments. We love the fact that the community is growing. If you can leave a comment with what you think about the Camp Cupcake. Do you think it should be excluded? Some people are arguing that it shouldn't happen again. But I think it's a good chance to give some guys an opportunity, especially since we have the Olympics this year. I think it's a valuable thing. It gives a lot of these guys the first opportunity to put on the kit. We know it's not a real camp, but it's still, they're going to get to run around with the national team colors. And that's always nice to see. So thank you, Braden. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends. We'll see you next time.